Have you ever wondered why someone would leave behind a country of snow-filled streets, grand stone buildings, and centuries of history, just to fly to a humid, noisy, unpredictable place they have never seen? What would make someone trade the familiar cold of Russia for the chaotic warmth of the Philippines? In 2025, something quiet began to unfold. No breaking news, no trending headline, no viral announcement. Just planes landing, dorm rooms filling, immigration lines growing longer. And slowly, almost invisibly, a pattern appeared. On campuses in Manila, Cebu, Davao, Baguio, and Iloilo, pale faces with heavy accents started showing up in classrooms, cafeterias, and jeepneys. Russian students. Not a few. Not dozens. Thousands. They did not come as tourists. They did not come for a vacation. Many of them did not even come for the beaches or the malls or the nightlife. They came for something they could not fully explain. At least, not at first. This is the story of why thousands of Russian students quietly chose the Philippines in 2025, and what they found here that their own powerful, historic homeland could not give them. Our story begins with one man. His name is Dmitry. He is 24 years old, born and raised in St. Petersburg. He grew up in a gray apartment block, where winter seemed to last half the year, and neighbors rarely looked each other in the eye. The streets were beautiful, yes, old, grand, impressive. But the air often felt heavy. Heavy with history. Heavy with tension. Heavy with the unspoken rule. Be strong. Be quiet. Keep your feelings to yourself. When Dmitry was 15, his grandfather fell ill and was taken to a hospital in Moscow. The corridors were white and cold. The faces were tired. The nurses were efficient but distant. And then, one evening, a new nurse appeared at his grandfather's bedside. Her name was Grace. She was from the Philippines. She did not speak much Russian. He did not speak English. But something passed between them that went beyond language. She would hold his grandfather's hand when the pain became too much. She would hum a soft, wordless tune as she adjusted his blanket. She would smile at Dmitry's mother with a warmth that made the fear in her eyes soften, even if just for a moment. One night, on the way home, Dmitry's mother said quietly, "I don't know who that nurse is, but she has shown your grandfather more kindness in 2 weeks than some people do in a lifetime." Dmitry never forgot that. He could not remember every detail of her face, but he remembered the feeling. Like sunlight, in the middle of winter. Years passed. He finished school. He worked small jobs. His friends dreamed of Germany, Canada, America. But when he started searching for study opportunities abroad, something strange happened. Every time he opened a list of countries, one name kept pulling his eyes back: the Philippines. He read that the universities taught in English, that the tuition was cheaper, that many foreign students came for medicine, nursing, IT, and business. But inside him, another memory spoke louder. He remembered the nurse from his grandfather's hospital bed. He remembered the way she treated a stranger like family. And a question grew quietly in his mind. He thought to himself, if one Filipino stranger could make my grandfather feel safe in a cold Russian hospital, what kind of country creates people like that? He did not tell many friends. He did not make a big announcement. Quietly, secretly, he sent out his application to a university in Manila, and without really understanding why, he pressed submit. Dmitry was not alone. Hundreds of kilometers away, in another Russian city, a 26-year-old woman named Elena was fighting her own silent battle. Elena worked in a private clinic as a medical assistant and part-time IT staff. Her days were long, her nights were short, and the pressure never seemed to end. Patients came and went like numbers on a list. The deadlines were tight. Mistakes were never allowed. And in the middle of all of this, she felt something inside her slowly burning out. But in that same clinic, there was a small group of workers who stood out. Filipino caregivers, Filipino nurses, Filipino cleaners. They were always busy, often tired. But somehow, their eyes were different. They laughed with one another during breaks. They prayed quietly before starting a difficult shift. They spoke to patients, not as tasks to be completed, but as people to be cared for. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day, Elena watched a Filipino caregiver chatting with an elderly patient. They did not share a language, but the patient looked calmer just by holding her hand. And Elena felt something twist inside her chest. I want to know, she thought, where this kind of kindness comes from. How can people be this gentle and this strong at the same time? She started watching videos about the Philippines online. She saw fiestas filled with color, street food stalls laughing through the night, church services overflowing with people, families crowding around tiny tables and still insisting, "Kain tayo, let's eat together." In 2025, after saving what she could, Elena made a decision. She would take an advanced study program in the Philippines. Not just for a diploma, but for a change she could feel she desperately needed, even if she could not name it. She also did not know, yet, that she was part of something much bigger. The first time Dimitri's plane began to descend into Manila, he pressed his forehead to the window. All he could see was a thick, glowing blanket of lights and a darkness he could almost feel. The cabin lights dimmed. People around him began to shuffle, unbuckle, stretch. Then, he noticed something strange. A man across the aisle made the sign of the cross. A woman whispered a small prayer, her lips moving almost imperceptibly. There was no performance, no shame, just faith, quietly practiced at 30,000 feet. As the wheels touched the ground, a voice behind him spoke softly in Russian. "Almost home," the woman said. Dimitri turned slightly. She was pale, like him. Her accent was Russian. She wasn't Filipino, and she had never been to the Philippines. "Still," she said, "almost home." It was not a joke, not sarcasm. It was something else, something he did not yet understand. At the immigration line, the officer stamped his passport and smiled. "Welcome to the Philippines," he said, simple but sincere. Outside the airport doors, the thick, tropical air wrapped around him like a heavy blanket. It smelled like exhaust fumes, street food, humidity, and something alive. Near the entrance, an older woman was handing out small, folded pieces of paper, Bible verses, short prayers. She pressed one into the hand of a stranger, as if she were passing on a secret piece of courage. A security guard nodded at him and said, "Welcome, sir," as if he were not a foreigner, but a relative who had been gone for a long time. Dimitri felt a confusion he could not quite name. In Russia, public spaces felt guarded. Here, everything was exposed, noisy, messy, and yet, strangely, soft. Miles away, on another day, Elena stepped out of her own arrival hall. A staff member offered to help her with her luggage. A stranger pointed her toward a taxi with a smile and a simple, "Ma'am, welcome." She blinked, surprised. They said welcome like they actually meant it. Both of them, Dimitri and Elena, stepped into the Manila air with suitcases in their hands. And a feeling, deep inside, that they didn't yet have words for. Dimitri thought he was the only Russian student on campus, the unusual one, the brave one, the outlier. On his first day at the international office, he stood in line, clutching his documents, trying to decode the fast English and occasional Tagalog around him. Then he heard it. A familiar word, spoken with a familiar rhythm. Russian. He turned. Behind him stood a man with the same pale skin, the same tired eyes, and the same awkward expression. "You're from Russia too?" the man asked, in Russian. Dimitri nodded. Around them, he began to notice more faces. A woman from Moscow, a man from Siberia, another from Vladivostok, students from Kazan, Yekaterinburg, and other towns he only knew from maps. They laughed quietly in relief. "I thought I was the only crazy one who came here," one of them joked. Another shook his head. "No, bro. There are many of us now. Look around." As weeks passed, Dimitri started seeing them everywhere. In the cafeteria line, in the library, on the bleachers near the basketball court. Russian students, study permit holders. Foreigners who somehow seemed perfectly out of place, and yet exactly where they were supposed to be. One afternoon, as they sat beneath a campus tree, Dimitri asked one of them, "Why did you come here? Really?" The man smiled thoughtfully. "Because this country gives something Russia forgot," he replied. Dmitri frowned. What is that something? The man only shrugged, still smiling. You'll see. Dmitri expected to spend his first week sitting in the back of classrooms, unseen, unnoticed, and uninvited. He was wrong. On his second day of classes, he slipped into a seat near the corner, clutching his notebook, scanning the room without trying to be obvious. A Filipino guy in a blue jacket noticed him and raised a hand in an easy wave. Bro, here, sit with us. His name was Carlo, 25 years old. Filipino, loud laugh, soft heart. Dmitri sat down cautiously at first. Carlo turned to him as if they had been friends for years. So, you're from Russia, right? How cold is it there? Like freezer cold? Do you eat snow? The entire group laughed, not at him but with him. They asked about his hometown, his family, his first impressions of Manila. They listened with genuine curiosity. They introduced themselves one by one, making sure he learned their names. When class ended, they all stood outside the building, chatting under a sky that was starting to darken. Then, suddenly, rain. Not the slow, polite rain of Europe. Not snow. A wall of water crashed down from the sky without warning. Dmitri froze under the overhang, stunned. In Russia, rain was often thin, icy, or mixed with snow. This was like standing in front of a waterfall. Carlo laughed, pulling off his jacket. He held it above both of their heads and said, "Come on, bro, we run." Before Dmitri could protest, they were sprinting across the open space together, shoes splashing, clothes soaking, both of them laughing like children chased by a wild storm. By the time they reached the cafeteria, they were drenched from head to toe. They collapsed onto a bench, catching their breath, still laughing. That night, as Dmitri lay in his dorm room replaying the moment, he realized something quietly shocking. It had been years since he had laughed like that. Years since something so simple had made him feel so alive. On another part of campus, Elena had her own first taste of Filipino friendship. After a long class, her Filipino classmates turned to her and said, "Ma'am Elena, coffee tayo? Let's get coffee. You join us. Huwag ka mahiya. Don't be shy." They asked about her job back home, her favorite food, what Russian winter really felt like. They teased her gently about her accent, but in a way that made her feel included, not mocked. In a matter of days, both Dmitri and Elena realized something stunning. In a place they had never seen before, surrounded by people they had never met, they were no longer invisible. A few days later, Dmitri was walking near campus when a smell stopped him in his tracks. Garlic, fried fish, soup simmering in a metal pot. He followed the scent to a small carinderia, a simple, open-front eatery with plastic chairs, metal tables, and a handwritten menu. Behind the counter stood a woman in her 40s, wiping down a tabletop and humming quietly. She looked up and saw him. Her face lit up. "Ay, anak, you look tired. Sit, I'll give you something warm." Anak, the Tagalog word for child. He hesitated, but she motioned him to sit. She placed a bowl of steaming soup and a plate of rice in front of him. "How much?" he asked, reaching for his wallet. She shook her head. "Next time, Nalang. Next time you pay. First time here, welcome." She smiled in a way that reminded him, for a split second, of his own mother. In Russia, kindness that big almost always came with suspicion. "What do you want? What are you trying to gain?" Here, it came with steam rising from a bowl and the clatter of spoons, as casually as passing someone a glass of water. Across town, Elena sat in another eatery after class. Her classmates joked with the owner. "Liza, dagdagan mo rice ni Ma'am Elena. Russian yan, malakas kumain sa lamig." "Add rice for Ma'am Elena. She's Russian. They eat a lot in the cold." Everyone laughed. The joke wasn't sharp. It wasn't cruel. It was a way of pulling her into the circle. Liza, the owner, smiled at Elena. "Here, eat more, anak. Out there you are foreign, but in my carinderia, you're family." Slowly, Both Dmitri and Elena began to notice how the smallest acts seemed to carry the deepest meanings. A vendor arranging his goods before sunrise. A man sweeping the sidewalk in front of a shop that barely earned enough in a day. A woman adjusting her husband's backpack and kissing his cheek before he left for work. Strangers saying, "Ingat," take care, as if they truly meant it. They had expected the Philippines to be affordable. They had not expected it to be rich in a different currency. Simple, everyday humanity. One warm afternoon, Dmitri sat beneath a large tree near the campus library, flipping through his notes. Sweat formed at the back of his neck. Children's laughter echoed faintly from somewhere in the distance. The campus hum surrounded him. An older man approached, carrying two worn-out books. He looked to be in his late 60s. His hair was thinning. His shirt was simple. His sandals had seen many years. He stopped near the bench and smiled. "Son, would you mind if I sit here?" Dmitri nodded. Of course. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes. No rush, no pressure to speak. Finally, the man turned to him. "You're not from here, are you?" "No," Dmitri replied. "I'm from Russia." The man nodded thoughtfully, as if this explained something invisible. "I'm Mateo," he said, "retired teacher. I come here to read, to feel young people around me. It keeps me alive." They both chuckled softly. Mateo flipped through one of his books, then closed it gently. "Do you like it here?" he asked. It sounded like a simple question, but something in his eyes made it deeper. Dmitri hesitated. "More than I expected," he answered honestly. Mateo studied his face for a moment. "You look," he said slowly, "like someone who carries something heavy. How long have you been carrying it?" The words pierced straight through him. Dmitri opened his mouth, but no answer came out. How could he explain the years of pressure? Growing up in a place where strength was mandatory, where vulnerability was dangerous, where silence was safer than honesty. He stared down at his hands. Mateo placed a gentle hand on the bench, not too close, but close enough. "Son," he said quietly, "our people, we see pain even when others hide it well. We don't turn away from it, not because we are strong, but because we are used to walking beside it." He paused for a moment. "Every Filipino carries a story. Every Filipino carries faith. That is why we recognize it in others." Dmitri felt a knot in his throat. Mateo stood, gathering his books. Before walking away, he added one last line. "The world teaches us to survive alone. The Philippines teaches us to survive together. That is why people come here, even when they cannot explain it." The words hung in the air long after Mateo left. Dmitri sat there, staring at the space the old man had just occupied. A key, waiting for a door. A few days later, Carlo approached Dmitri after class. "Bro," he said, slinging a bag over his shoulder. "We have an outreach this weekend. Outside the city. You should come." "What kind of outreach?" Dmitri asked. "We visit a community, bring food, talk with people, pray with them. You'll understand my country more if you see this." No long explanation, just an invitation. For reasons he couldn't explain, Dmitri said yes. They left the city early in the morning. The tall buildings faded into smaller houses. Concrete gave way to fields. Paved roads narrowed and grew rougher. Eventually, they arrived at a small community center. The homes were modest. Some walls were patched. Some roofs were held together by hope and metal sheets. Yet the people greeted them with smiles that reached their eyes. "Salamat sa pagpunta," they said. "Thank you for coming." Dmitri helped carry boxes of food and simple supplies. He watched as volunteers, mostly young adults, spread out, knocking on doors, greeting families by name. Carlo guided him to one house. Inside, an elderly woman lay on a bamboo bed. Her skin was thin, her breathing shallow. Beside her sat her adult daughter, holding her hand, whispering something softly into her ear. The volunteers stepped inside, removing their shoes. They gathered around her, greeting her gently. One of them knelt beside her, taking the old woman's fragile hand in both of his. "How are you today, Tita Rosa?" he asked. She smiled weakly. "I am tired," she admitted, "but I am thankful you are here." Someone suggested a prayer. The group bowed their heads. Then, very softly, one of the volunteers began to sing a hymn. Others joined. Their voices were not perfect. Some were slightly out of tune, but there was a warmth in the sound that filled the tiny room like light. Dmitri stood near the doorway, frozen. The air seemed to thicken. It felt like the world had shrunk to this one simple room. A frail woman, a tired daughter, a circle of strangers who were not acting like strangers at all. And suddenly, he was not in the Philippines anymore. He was back in that Russian hospital room. He saw his grandfather on a bed. He heard the soft humming of a Filipino nurse. He remembered the way she made his entire family feel less alone in a place that felt unbearably cold. Without warning, tears rose in his eyes. He lifted a hand to his face, pretending to scratch, trying to hide the emotion spilling over. Carlo noticed. He didn't ask, "What's wrong?" He didn't push. He simply stepped closer and placed a hand on Dimitri's shoulder. No words, no explanations, just presence. The hymn came to an end. Tita Rosa opened her eyes and looked around at everyone in the room. In a voice barely louder than a breath, she whispered, "God bless you, all of you." It was not said only to the volunteers, not only to her daughter, but to every soul present in that fragile space. As they stepped back outside into the sunlight, Dmitri wiped his face with the back of his hand. Carlo glanced at him, then smiled gently. "Now you understand a little," he said. "This is what my country is. Not perfect, not rich, not always safe, but full of heart. People come here because they can feel it, even before they know what it is." In that moment, Dmitri realized something had shifted inside him. He had not just visited a community. He had walked into the heart of a truth he never expected to find. While Dimitri's heart was being quietly changed in a small community outside the city, Elena was fighting a different battle back in her rented room. Between her classes, her part-time shifts, and the constant effort of adjusting to a new culture, her strength was beginning to crack. One night, after a long day, she closed the door behind her, set down her bag, and felt everything inside her collapse. She sat on the edge of her bed and began to cry, not the silent, controlled tears she was used to hiding, but deep, shaking sobs that she hadn't allowed herself in years. In Russia, she had learned to break in private and repair herself before anyone could see. Tonight, she did not have the energy to even pretend. A soft knock came at the door. "Elena?" It was her landlady, a woman in her 50s who lived downstairs. "Are you okay?" Elena hurriedly wiped her face and opened the door a crack. Her landlady held a small plate, covered with a piece of cloth. "I cooked too much," the older woman said. "Maybe you want some?" She noticed the redness in Elena's eyes. She didn't ask, "What happened?" or demand an explanation. Instead, she stepped inside, placed the plate on the small table, and sat down beside her. "It's okay to cry, Anak," she said softly. "You're far from home. But here, you are not alone." Elena broke again, but this time, not in isolation. Her landlady did not try to fix everything. She did not offer speeches or solutions. She simply stayed. In that simple act, sitting beside someone in their pain, Elena felt a lesson that no textbook had ever taught her. Back home, she had learned to survive by closing her heart. Here, she was beginning to learn something else. Sometimes, the only way to truly survive is to let other people in. A week later, Dmitri walked past a small basketball court near campus. A group of men stood in a loose circle. Their faces were serious, their posture attentive. Curious, he moved closer. At the center stood a man in a simple military uniform. He looked to be in his early 30s. His name, someone whispered, was Sergeant Raoul. He had just come home on a short leave. He spoke quietly about his months away, about nights without sleep, about fear that he tried to hide, about the weight of responsibility he carried. The men around him listened. They did not interrupt. They did not change the subject. They did not tell him to man up or be stronger. When he finished, one older man stepped forward. He placed a hand gently on Raoul's shoulder. "You are our son too," he said. "You protect us. You protect this land." For a moment, the soldier, this grown man trained to be tough, lowered his head. No one mocked him. No one laughed. They simply stood with him, letting his burden rest on their shoulders for a moment. From a distance, Dmitri watched, stunned. He had grown up in a country where strength often meant being hard, being silent, being alone. Here, he was seeing something else. He whispered to himself, they carry each other. That's how they survive. One day, a professor in one of Dimitri's classes made an unusual request. Next week, she said, I would like our international students to share something about their experience here. Sometimes, outsiders see things locals forget to appreciate. Dimitri wanted to refuse. He didn't think he understood Filipino culture well enough to speak. But the professor's eyes were kind. So he said yes. The following week, he stood at the front of the classroom. Elena stood beside him. Rows of Filipino students watched, waiting. He cleared his throat. In my country, he began slowly, people are strong. Strong in the way winter forces you to be. Strong in the way history teaches you to survive. He paused, searching for the right words. Back home, I thought strength meant not showing your feelings, not needing anyone, surviving alone. He looked around the room. But here, I saw a different kind of strength. Strength that looks like kindness. Strength that looks like humility. Strength that looks like laughing loudly, crying openly, praying together. He glanced at Elena, who nodded and continued. I came here burned out, she said. Tired of pretending everything was okay. In the Philippines, people did something I wasn't used to. They noticed, she said simply. They noticed when I was tired. They noticed when I was quiet. They sat beside me, even when they didn't know my whole story. A hand went up in the room. A Filipino student, eyes soft, asked, So, do you feel like you belong here? The question hung in the air. Dimitri looked at the faces in front of him. He thought of Carlo, laughing in the rain. Of Liza, calling him a knock and giving him soup. Of Mateo, talking about pain and faith. Of Tita Rosa, whispering a blessing. Of his landlady, sitting beside Elena as she cried. He took a breath. I think, he said slowly, that for the first time in my life, I know what belonging feels like. The classroom was quiet for a heartbeat. Then, gentle applause filled the room. Not loud, not performative, just warm. The kind of applause that feels less like noise and more like an embrace. One late afternoon, the sky turning gold and the air heavy with the smell of street food, Dimitri climbed into a jeepney. He took a seat near the back. Around him were office workers, vendors, construction workers, students. Adults who had lived through storms, both literal and metaphorical. The driver tapped the rosary hanging from the rearview mirror and made the sign of the cross before starting the engine. A woman handed her fare forward, trusting strangers to pass it along honestly. Someone getting off said, Ingat po, take care. No one thought twice about it. As the jeepney rattled through the streets, Dimitri looked at the faces around him. Tired, but gentle. Burdened, but hopeful. He thought back to the question that began all of this. Why would thousands of Russian students quietly come to the Philippines in 2025? On paper, the answers looked simple. Affordable tuition, English-speaking universities, warmer climate, opportunities abroad. But deep down, he knew there was more. They came to a country where faith still lives in the open, where community is not just a word, but a daily practice, where strangers call you bro, sir, ma'am, anak, and tita, like family titles handed out for free. They came because, in a world that teaches people to build walls, this small archipelago still instinctively builds tables. They didn't just come to escape something. They came to find something. A place that, somehow, felt like it remembered a truth the rest of the world was slowly forgetting. He looked out at the Manila sunset and thought, maybe the real shock isn't that we left Russia. Maybe the real shock is that in a tropical country we barely knew on the map, we finally found what home feels like. And perhaps, that is why thousands of Russian students quietly came to the Philippines in 2025. Not because their homeland was empty, but because their hearts were. And here, in the warmth of a people who survive together, they finally learned that they don't have to survive alone.